I've put here, he was an inveterate individualist, almost in the face of the changing world. I mean, he was the one. Sherlock Holmes once said to Dr. Watson, "You are the one fixed point in an ever-changing world." And I think that could be said about Voysey. But I've put the last of the old or the first of the new because he was claimed by many people, including the great Nicholas Pevsner, as being a great pioneer of the modern movement, of modern architecture. A claim that Voysey himself always vigorously resisted. He hated modern architecture. And in fact, going to an exhibition of the Modern Architect Research Group in, I think, 1931, which is one of the first exhibitions of the modern movement architecture in this country, he said he felt physically sick, which I think is quite ironic. And I think often people can be pioneers of something without necessarily realizing it, and I would suggest that's true of him. Anyway, on with the pictures. I gather you have a break at 8:15. I've got about an hour's worth of slides. I'm going to whip through them pretty smartly. But you can be let off the last bit if you've had enough by, 3/4 of the way through. All right? So here we go. Now, I'm starting off with one of the great pioneers behind Voysey, Norman Shaw, who many of you may know, there's a house in Streatham by him, designed like many of his houses were for an artist. One of his best houses, I think, is Grimsdyke at Harrow, which we were talking just now about John Betchman's programme Metroland. Grimsdyke features in that, and it's a wonderful house. And I went there once on a snowy morning, Sunday morning in April, I think it was, and it was one of the first Norman Shaw houses I'd ever seen, and it really bowled me over. But Norman Shaw was a great pioneer of really the arts and crafts movement. And another one was Ernest George, who designed several things in Streatham. You may know these buildings. Ernest George actually lived in Streatham, and he used to ride his horse into his office, which was just in Great Marlborough Street, just by where Liberties is now, presumably every morning. And Lutyens was a pupil of his, although Lutyens very disparaging about him. That's another Ernest George building in Streatham. Now, Voysey's dad was a clergyman, so he'd been at home here, but he was a rebel clergyman. He was a man with a very kind heart, but he actually didn't believe, he had such a kind heart that he refused to subscribe to the doctrine of everlasting hellfire for sinners. And for that, he was ejected, he was expelled from the Church of England. There was a huge furore about it, and he became a national celebrity over it. But his refusal to bend his opinions definitely was inherited by his son. This is just a mention of the fact that he was deprived of his living. Well, it just says more or less what I've just said. That's Voysey as a young chap of 8 years old. He was born in Hessel near Hull, and he lived there until he was about 13, I think, when they moved down to Dulwich. This was after Dad had been expelled, and they lived in a house in College Road in Dulwich. And he was sent, young Voysey had been educated at home up to then, and he was sent then to Dulwich College, which these new buildings had just been finished. You know, they were paid for by money they made from selling land for the railways being built on them. But they didn't allow the railway to go anywhere near the college. So it shows how extensive the estate was. Anyway, he was sent to Dulwich College, but he hated it. It was the first time he'd been to school, and he survived about 14 months and was dismissed by his art teacher, who was actually a Royal Academician, as having no future in any career to do with art. He never passed the exam. And it'd be interesting to speculate. Amongst the old boys of Dulwich are P.G. Woodhouse and Bob Monkhouse, great comedians. And it'd be interesting to know how Voysey would have been altered if he'd been there at the same time. Nigel Farage also. I think he would have actually, their views would have tallied on the... Voysey thought going to any foreign country was corrupting. So I guess, and that included Europe. The only foreign country he ever went to was Holland. Under suffragans, I think. Not suffragans, suffragans. Anyway, I love that picture of the work, the work of Camille Pizarro. He painted large tracts of South London beautifully. Now, Pugin was a huge inspiration of Voysey. Pugin was another man of unbending opinions. And one of his opinions that he hated anything to do with classical architecture. And he quoted Sir John Soane, whose house is in third along there, which you can still see in Lincoln's Inn Fields. You can go round it. That was the ultimate sort of pit as far as architecture for him was concerned. The Gothic was the only true style. He designed wallpaper in this very sort of neo-medieval style. He designed the pretty amazing chairs too. Two on the right, I think, were designed for the Houses of Parliament. They look rather punitive to me, don't they? I don't think it'd be very comfortable to sit on. There is Soane's Museum on the left. There's Dulwich College. Of course, that's the Dulwich College Art Gallery, or it's the Dulwich Art Gallery, isn't it? Designed by Soane. So Voysey would have known that, and maybe he hated it. Maybe he learned to hate it, having read his Pugin. Another great inspiration, of course, is Ruskin, who lived not far from here, the sage of Denmark Hill. And his book, The Stones of Venice, was I put his lady friend on. You probably know he's married for 5 years to the lady who eventually became married to Millet. And the marriage was not consummated for 5 years. She ended up having about 14 children once she married Millet. But he wrote very extensively. He was a great art historian. And I've just I put this up because it's actually quite fundamental to the arts and crafts movement. And certainly to Voysey's view, the idea of sacrifice, you're building a building as a worship to God, and truth is being honest to materials, which Voysey doesn't always actually true to. He didn't always run true to form on that. Buildings should be powerful through their massing rather than through decorative detail. They should be beautiful. Sorry, I'm run back. They should be made by human hands. This is, again, very much arts and crafts. They respect the culture. Voysey thought that Gothic was the true culture of this country, even though it came from France. And there should be obedient. There should be no originality for its own sake. Again, you need to stick to national traditions. So these are all fundamental principles. Now, Voysey was, having been enthused by all this, but never having passed an exam. And in those days, architecture was one of the few professions, as Voysey himself said, that you go into without passing an exam. His life started to change, and that was another thing he resisted. But he was first articled to John Pollard Seddon, who was a Gothic architect, who actually designed a house in Tulse Hill. I haven't looked for it, actually, but it may well still be here. But he designed all over the case, a lot of rectories and so on. And that building on the right one could think of almost as the sort of thing that Voysey was inspired by in the first place. There he is. Oh, no, sorry. He then went to Saxon Snell, who was primarily a hospital architect, and he was very interested in ventilation. Now, Voysey also is very interested in ventilation, and so this could well be where he got that from. This is the period of Florence Nightingale and ventilation wards, cross-ventilation and so on. So, interesting time to be around. But he then went as a finisher almost to George Devey. Now, George Devey specialised in building large houses for aristocrats. But he was a member of the new church that Voysey's father founded in the Theist church, theistic church in London, which essentially was like Unitarians. They believed in God, but not in all the bits that went with it. And they didn't believe that the Bible was, literally true, which again was regarded as heretical at the time by many people. Now, George Devey, among many other things, built a lot of cottages on the Clifton estate. And in one of those, you remember John Profumo and his affair with Christine Keeler? Well, that's where it happened, in one of George Devey's cottages. So thank goodness George Voysey wasn't around at the time. Another great influence was McMurdo. You may not have heard of McMurdo. He was slightly more obscure. But can you see these exhibition stands? The one on the third one along is a drawing of the photograph on the right. They have these mortarboard caps on the top. Can you see those? This became a very prominent Voysey motif. McMurdo also designed wallpaper. He also is famous for writing a pamphlet trying to save. A lot of the Wren City churches were demolished in the 1880s to make way for the expansion of London. And McMurdo was one of those who campaigned against this. So he was an early protector of ancient buildings, if you like. There's Voysey as a relatively young man, looking a bit like the Duke of Edinburgh, I think. And on the right, there he is with his young wife, you know, little turtle doves. Things didn't go quite like that after some years, as I'll tell you in a minute. Now, Voysey lived for a time in Streatham, in Tierney Road, number 45. And I went there quite recently, and I was amazed to see this heart, which is one of Voysey's motifs, in the colour, in the fanlight above the front door. Fascinating. He then moved to St John's Wood, and people think at that point this move made his architecture more radical. And I'll show you an example in a minute of that. Another big thing for him was joining the Art Workers Guild. Now, this was founded by Norman Shaw and his pupils, 5 of his pupils, who all became very distinguished. And they weren't in those premises originally. But Voysey, it was founded in 1884, Voysey joined in 85, and it was really one of his homes, second home for the rest of his life. That's a picture of him in the middle, done in 1931. Do you see the bird on his head? He loved birds as a design element. And they're having sherry. Having sherry was a great tradition. I'd love to know whether it was dry or sweet, but I suspect dry because he had very refined tastes. That's the exhibition room, which is now used by the Victorian Society for their lectures until lockdown. We haven't been back since. And there's a portrait. Voysey was master of the Art Workers Guild in 1924, and there's a portrait of him on the left there, too small to see, but that's it. So we're back to fitness for purpose. It's not a new term. It's used bandied about an awful lot now, but it was termed by Ruskin, actually, with due to his 7 lamps of architecture. And Voysey was a very strong follower of this. Voysey believed in serenity, tranquility, and I won't linger on this too long, but I mean, one of the way you achieved it was by having horizontal lines wherever possible. Quietness. You avoided having different floor coverings because Voysey thought it upset the sensations if you walked on pavement and then on a carpet and then on a mat. It upset the senses, so it destroyed this tranquility. So I think he probably was on the spectrum, but you know. Right, he was very keen on light, and I'll show you some examples of the way he used it. This is just a reference to this. I was fascinated to discover recently, seeing an exhibition of Surrey, I think in Oxford, that there was a great move at that time about horizontality and the way it induced serenity. And Voysey was obviously picking up on this. Angles, awkward angles to the horizontal disrupted the senses. And Surrey was very interested in this, and that picture is an example of his influence by producing this sense of tranquility with horizontals. Here is Voysey talking about how colours should harmonise too, as they do in nature. And I thought this is a wonderful quote. I think this says a great deal. Try the effect of a well-proportioned room with whitewashed walls, plain carpet, and simple oak furniture, and nothing but necessary articles of use, and one pure ornament in the form of a simple vase of flowers. And you will then find reflections will begin to dance in your brain. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I mean, it really caught my imagination when I first read that about 50 years ago. Now, Morris, of course, a great influence too, and Philip Webb, his great architect. Philip Webb was a socialist. Voysey, in fact, was very conservative, with a small c at least. And he loved Morris's designs, but he didn't approve of Morris because he was too much of a socialist. And Philip Webb was also a socialist. So I'm not surprised to see that Philip Webb does not feature in Voysey's address book, even though he lived until 1915. You know, I'm sure many of you will know the Red House. This really is the archetypal, the foundation of the arts and crafts movement. And there are also many Voysey motifs. The round windows are something that Voysey picked up on, and that brick fireplace is very like some of Voysey's early fireplaces. The staircase, again, reminiscent of those verticals, which somewhat strangely contrast with the horizontals. I mean, I think you're allowed to do that on staircases. But the Red House is really, if you haven't been there, Bexley Heath, absolutely wonderful. And his wallpapers, of course, his fabric designs. So, Voysey said he never went, Morris Company had a shop in Oxford Street. It later moved off Hanover Square, but Voysey used to avoid going into, he went into the shop once. he avoided ever going in there again in case Morris's designs influenced his, in case he plagiarised Morris inadvertently. Now, I mentioned Voysey's hearts. I've got this theory that his Alice in Wonderland was published when Voysey was about 7 years old. And given that Lewis Carroll was also a renegade rebel churchman, he may well have known Voysey Senior. And I wonder whether that could have possibly awakened Voysey to the symbolic possibilities of the heart. Now, arts and crafts, we're going to get onto Voysey in a minute, but another important element, going back to Ruskin, is that one of the ideas in the arts and crafts movement is that buildings grow out of the ground, and Voysey does that with his buttresses and various other ways. This is a classic example where Gimson is building on a slope deliberately, so that it really does look as if it's organic, doesn't it? Gimson's great nephew taught me at dentistry at King's. He was one of the senior lecturers there. Another pioneer, Owen Jones, he came on the scene. He travelled all around the world gathering designs, such as you see on the right, abstract designs for the most part. He also was advisor on the Crystal Palace, the decoration there, and advised on using a blue colour because it produced a sense of distance. Anyway, now we're on to Voysey's textile designs. Now, Walter Essex plays a big part in Voysey's life, not least because he had lived in a house just down the road from here, half a mile away, called Dixcote, some of you may know. Now, Voysey was best known, really, until he got known as an architect. He was best known as a designer, and he became very well known on the continent. And it's interesting, his designs on the whole are flat. Morris's designs later became flatter, but a lot of Morris's designs at the height of his career were 3D, if you like. They had a texture, which Owen's designs were also flat, but Voysey certainly went in for flat designs, and he loved birds. I've mentioned that. This is one of his earliest for Essex. The next few I'm going to show you were all for Essex and Company, as his architectural career was getting going. The one on the right for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and that was a great time for building, because it was a time of great prosperity and pride in the empire, however misplaced you might think it was. It was a commercial boom. So a lot of Voysey and other people did an awful lot of building around that time. More designs for Essex. These are models for Voysey's designs, which are in a file in the RIBA. Prints, such as the one on the right, and photographs, as you see. It's difficult to see, actually. There's a bird sitting on a tree there. And also these things called Hislop's prints. Nothing to do with in Hislop, I don't think. But essentially, these are you press leaves against paper and sort of rub your pencil against them. So you get this direct print at low cost, which Voysey used as sources for his designs. Now, this is a early design by Voysey. It wasn't built, but it's very much based on the Norman Shaw George Devey style, half timbering, real or applied, I'm not sure. But it does give a very good idea about Voysey's design ideas when he first set off. If you look at that lovely ogee cap on the tower there, we see that again. This was really the first complete house he built in Bishop's Itchington in Warwickshire. It's a beautiful house, very cottagey. It's like a sort of huge overgrown cottage. And the interesting thing is that he uses, at this point, he's not using stone mullioned windows, which he later used almost everywhere. These are, although they're metal frame windows, they're in wooden mullions. There's one of his brackets there, which he became famous for, gutter brackets. There's one of his buttresses, a very early instance of one of his buttresses, which weren't needed at all, incidentally. I mean, his son, who became a very distinguished architect, was always very cynical about the fact that they were completely unnecessary and were done for romantic reasons, and others have agreed with him. Now, one of the other great things, I was talking about his ventilation, as he learned from Saxon Snell. one of the, from the very earliest days, he had an interesting, almost, I don't think he invented it, but it was a ventilation system he used at every house he built, and most other buildings as well. Essentially, he had special air flues behind that grill on the left there, and they ran up. There was a separate flue running up the chimney, separate from the smoke flue, and as the hot air rose from the fire, it drew air through his passive air flue ventilation system. And later on, he designed a rather splendid grill that was then used invariably. You can see the grill at the top of the chimney, just on the left-hand side below the top. That's the outflow. Brick fireplaces here. Now, this is the first sort of, outre house he built. There he is looking very artistic on the left. This building caused quite a furore in Bedford Park, which is Norman Shaw laid it out, and the buildings are very much in his sort of style, neo-Anglo-Dutch style. Voysey built this tower house with an OG roof. Well, it's a conical roof on the top, an OG roof over that bay at the front, for an artist called Forster. He added a little bit 3 years later, you'll see on the left there, with the artist's wife standing there. But this really, it was a shock. It was really shocking the bourgeois, épater les bourgeois. And it shows he was a revolutionary. This is what the modern movement were doing in the 30s, which is one of the bits of evidence I would cite in suggesting he really was a pioneer of the modern movement. Forster House, it's called, on the Parade in Bedford Park. Now, his career, rather like Country Life, put Lutyens on the map later. The magazine that put Voysey on the map was The Studio, edited by Charles Home on the left there. And Voysey actually designed the first cover for the first volume. This is just Norman Shaw houses to show the influence on Voysey's first London building, which is that. Hans Road, or the first big building in London, he did build a studio in Kensington. This was built for a Liberal MP called Archibald Grove. And Voysey had the first recorded row with a client, of which he had quite a lot, over this house, because it was so bad. He built the first 2 houses. There was going to be a third one on the right, and Archibald Grove sent him packing. And the third house was actually built by McMurdo, who, member of the Malta cap we saw earlier on, with the man who did the campaign to save the Reading city churches. So it's quite a different style, very discordant. This is the front of the Voysey bit. I mean, it's wonderful stonework and very Voysey-esque. These lovely sort of, you could say, organic carvings on the front there, and these lovely cornices, which are really a classical element, because Voysey, again, a bit hypocritical about that, because he claimed to hate classical, or think classical architecture was entirely unsuitable for this country. And the hinges are very arts and crafts, aren't they? Very complex planning, because Voysey actually he doesn't get the credit he's due for the complexity of the planning that he introduced, not least here. There's a staircase with those mortarboard caps. Now, the second house he did was Walnut Tree Farm, the second country house, and that's a 3D perspective of it. That's what it looked like. That's a top photograph, actually, it's from Country Life. And then the third one, this is a very wonderful house called Perrycroft. It's difficult to see in this light, but there's a tower just about a third of the way along with an OG cap on it. And this was built for a Conservative MP, so he kept his options open. Again, lovely ironwork on the front door hinge, lovely details, and it looks down over the Malvern Hills. You can see in the background there. Wonderful house. And the other thing he loved, one of the many things he loved to do, is, do you see the profile of those brackets? Can you see those? They're actually a silhouette of his face. And he did that an awful lot, and I'll show you some more examples of it. And he loved these little cosy corners to sit and have a chat, these little windows. You see these all over the place in Voysey houses. We've got a rising staircase. He loved these great long newels leading one upstairs. There's a good example at Perrycroft, an early one. And a very good sense of space. You're looking here from the dining room into a little nook behind. They love these little nooks. You go and discuss how the shares are doing. or who's going to be the next prime minister? It would be now, wouldn't it? But and that's a bigger shot of the dining room. And in the corner of the dining room, there stands now a cabinet, which the current owners were told about by an antique dealer. They said, "We've got a cabinet by Voysey. You've got a Voysey house. You must have it." And this has been lost for years. And it turns out it was made originally for Lady Wentworth, because Voysey liked aristocratic clients, in 1893. And it sort of disappeared and come back again. And there it is at Perrycroft. Now, another early house was is one called Lowick's, in a beautiful place called Frensham in the middle of steeper Surrey, still is a very remote setting. And it was designed for one of his other very long-serving, loyal clients, called Emsley Horniman, and he was of the Horniman tea family. His dad, in fact, had paid for the Horniman Museum, for which he used Harrison Townsend, who was a friend of Voysey, but rather older than Voysey. And Emsley's wife, Laura, was the son. Oh, thank you. Yes, she was the. I'll show you the pictures. That'd be easier, wouldn't it? There we are. That's the house as you approach. Should we go back one just to? It's a rather romantic approach. I'll tell you the story anyway. Emsley's wife, Horniman's wife, he was from trade, in spite of they were jolly wealthy. And Laura, who he eventually married, came from a military family, and they didn't want Laura to marry into trade. So they locked her up in her bedroom. And she had very long hair, and she managed to persuade one of the servants in the house. She chopped off her hair, and she managed to persuade one of the servants in the house to take this hair up to a wig maker in London. And the money that she got for the wig enabled Laura to pay the stamp, which she hadn't any money at all, to send a letter to Emsley saying she was going to elope. Anyway, we're going on from Lowick's to talk about a number of his very well-known houses, many of which are around Guildford. And there's one called Grey Friars, which you can just see here. It's got a wonderful bay window. This was designed for a writer called Julian Sturgis, an American, who was a friend of Henry James and very much of the same ilk. It was unfortunately the whole inside, a lot of the main part of the house was gutted by Herbert Baker rather later, so a few of the Voysey fittings have survived. But just the next big job he did after that was a house called Norney Grange, again in the depths of Surrey. And he designed this for another dissident clergyman called Canon Leighton Grain. And this really is a tour de force. You can see the hall here in the picture. We're talking about these great rising verticals. You walk in through the door and you see these wonderful vertical uprights. It really is a tour de force. And it's continued with the balusters all running in the same direction. And in fact, if you look at the left-hand side of the hall, you see the banister running down at an angle. That was an alteration. The original baluster went straight across, as Voysey preferred. But obviously it was jolly impractical, because you couldn't, Cannon Grain had to sell it after only 2 or 3 years. I don't know whether he had an accident falling down the stairs when he missed the baluster. Okay, yeah, next slide, please. There we are. And next one. This is just emphasising what I said about the verticality. And this is about the light. Now, you see, Voysey liked to have windows near the ceiling. He liked low ceilings, 8 feet high. And the idea was the light would bounce off the ceiling. And it worked very well. But he had some clients didn't approve of that. Should we go on and... Yeah, well, that's what it looked like from the outside. It's a beautiful house. And you see what entrance that's had on suburban semi-detached houses, those bay windows. Not just semi-detached, actually. He designed for H.G. Wells, that spade house. H.G. Wells didn't want a heart on his front door. He didn't want to wear his heart on his sleeve. So he asked to have a spade instead. He had it upside down. So it was called Spade House. And originally, Voysey's building on a slope there. That's what it looks like on the right now. But he had it built on a slope because Voysey didn't like the ground to be disturbed. We're going back to Gimson and building out of the land. Okay. There's Voysey. There's Wells with his mother on the right there. His mother being a housekeeper at Up Park, you may know, in Sussex. And she thought it was recklessly extravagant to build your own house. So should we move on? There we are. Now here we are, local now. Dixcot. Now these you can't really see it, I'm afraid, but there are two maps here, Ordnance Survey maps, one from the 1870s and one from the, I think it's 1880s, no, 1890s actually, and the other one, I think the right-hand one is 1890s, the left-hand one is 1913, and it just shows Dixcot appeared, and also there's a house by Leonard Stokes. Do you know about that? Just round the corner. Leonard Stokes was another very prominent architect of the time. Should we move on? Is that, go on? There we are, that's the Leonard Stokes house. Some of you may recognise it. Leonard Stokes was actually president of the RBA when Lutyens went off to India to build New Delhi, and said goodbye to him as he boarded the boat. Okay, let's progress. Can we go on? There we are. Now here's Walter Essex, the client for Dixcot, running this fabric firm at Battersea. Emsley Horniman was was an MP. Only for 5 years, 1906 to 10, I think, actually 4 years. Walter Essex stayed in the Commons rather longer, but he's also a Liberal. And Dixcot, the story of Dixcot is very complicated, but in a nutshell, it was commissioned from Voysey in 1897. Voysey produced two designs. Evidently, Mrs. Essex didn't like either of them. Mrs. Essex was Walter's second wife, and you're not second wives alike. I don't, but I can imagine. She was younger, I suspect, than him. And the problem was she wanted higher ceilings. So we talked about Voysey and his love of low ceilings, and Voysey wouldn't compromise. So in the end, he went to his chum, Walter Cave, a fellow member of the Art Workers Guild, and Walter Cave finished the house off. And it's very interesting to look at the changes of design. I mean, the second, I think, can we go to the next slide? Go to another one too. I've got, that's just another house by Walter Cave, because he designed all sorts of different styles, but one of them was quite Voysey-esque, and that's a Voysey-esque Walter Cave house. Should we go, can we, yeah, there's Dixcot. That's Dixcot as it looked when it was first built. And you can see it's not Voysey. I mean, it was claimed by Pevsner when he did the Buildings of England, first of all. He refers to Dixcot as Voysey's largest London house, but it's actually a lot taller than it would have been if Voysey had designed it. Essex used a version of Voysey's design, but Cave was designed in a more robust way, it's described. It hasn't got quite the finesse, I think it's fair to say. Should we go on? I think you can't really, let's just go on. This is Dixcot more recently. I think open house in 2007 when I went. And on we go. That's bits of the inside, but again, you can't really see it all, so we'll go on, I think. And on again. Have we gone back? Oh, here we are. And on again. Essex, you see in the marble on the outside. And on again. You see, it hasn't got the finesse if you compare it with Voysey's fittings. There we are. And on again. That was quite Voysey-esque, but the brackets are much thicker, the roof brackets. And on again. There we are. That's the hall when it was first built. That's what it looked like when I first went in 1975, when it was being decorated. It was a children's home. And it was being decorated. Good time to get into houses when they're being decorated or when the estate agents are in, I find. On again. You can't really see them, can you? So we'll move on. That's a recent photograph. On again. That's a Walter Cave chair on the right, and I'll show you some Voysey ones in a minute, if you've got the stomach for it. That's another building where Walter Cave Berber is in Haymarket, showing how he could work in completely different style. Unlike Voysey. Now, another of Voysey's great houses was called Broadleys in the Lake District. He built two really prodigy houses on Lake Windermere, and the Broadleys was designed for somebody called Arthur Currer Briggs, who was an industrialist he was a coal miner actually, or he ran a coal mining firm in Leeds, and he became Lord Mayor of Leeds at one point. That's him, presumably recently married on the left. That's meant to show, but it's difficult, you can't really make it out. It's a coal miner at work to show where the money came from. And those are coal miners' cottages. Let's go on. That's Broadley's, that's the perspective drawing. We'll go on a bit from that. That's Broadley's as it was when it was first built, looking over Lake Windermere and on again. That's Currer Briggs in his car there with the chauffeur. He's obviously up to the minute stuff. On the right, actually, is Currer Briggs died in 1906, and his wife then let the house out. She obviously had her social life in Leeds. And one of the people who rented the house every summer for several years were the Potters of Beatrix Potter fame. And that picture on the right there is Beatrix Potter with her father standing outside the front door of Broadley's. Let's go on. That's Broadley's from the lake. Again, you can't really see the detail. That's the approach to the house, which is quite dramatic, actually. Very easy to miss the gateway. We have quite a lot of Voysey Society meetings there, and I missed the entrance 3 times during our last gathering. Not all on the same day, on successive days. So the next house we're going to see, I hope, is Moor Crag, which is built almost opposite on the other side of the road, also overlooking Windermere, also for an industrialist from Leeds. I think he was in cotton rather than coal. Anyway, one of the things that is striking, very arts and crafts really, is that Moor Crag, which is a classic double gable at each side of the house with a lower bit in the middle, to make the drive up to the house, a large amount of rock had to be blasted away, which is really rather anti-arts and crafts. But, this is just an example of how Voysey was a bit naughty sometimes. You know, you don't always get what you see. This is a beam across Broadley's. I've seen it in other houses too. There are what look like oak beams across some of the rooms holding the ceiling up. And in fact, if you look very carefully, you can see they're oak planks. And actually, there's probably a steel joint in there. It would have been a beam, it would have been steel, I imagine, by then. But this is just to show the way, the precision of the way that the glass fits into the stone mullions. And it has to be bent to fit it in. And it's a beautiful precision job. The other thing at Broadley's is that unlike all his other houses I've seen, which have bays, they're actually normally polygonal bays. So if you look, there are a series of straights linked together. At Broadley's, they actually are curved, and even the windows are curved, the glasses. So it must have been a very expensive, it's an expensive job. Okay, let's go on. These are just details of Broadley's. I'm just aware of the time. Shall we go on? There we are. That's the staircase, lovely vertical members. It's a wonderful staircase. With these little hearts set into the banisters. And I rather like to think they were bits of Westmoreland slate, but I'm assured on authoritative grounds that they're actually lead, which wouldn't be very good, would it now? Asbestos is bad enough. But anyway, that's overlooking the lake. That's one of his special little window ventilators, which we talked about the ventilation system earlier, didn't we? That one on the right, it's one small page. You see them in lots of rooms in many of his houses. So let's go on. This is the staircase. That's one of the Bedford Park. It's a rather bright yellow colour, which you can't really see there. This is the wonderful Inglenook fireplace with beautifully carved seats inside, and a gallery running across the back, so the servants can get one side of the house to the other without being seen, in the living room hall below. Very Victorian. You see, it's a miniature version of what you see in lots of Victorian country houses. And look at the stonework over the fireplace. And it's a Tudor arch, Gothic, Voysey's favourite sort of arch. And you can see at the bottom right there, do you remember we saw that, the Gorgon profile of Voysey in those brackets earlier on? That's how it appears at Broadley's. It's not just a profile, it's a sort of half the face. It's a full face, with the head, the back of the head's knocked off, just banged onto the oak. But I'm joking, of course. Let's go on. This is now the headquarters of the Windermere Motor. It's a racing boat club. I think motor doesn't appear in it. But their sails have been rather trimmed, if I can mix my metaphors, recently, because they've imposed a 4-mile-an-hour speed limit on Lake Windermere, which has rather hampered their motorboat efforts. I think they're allowed 1 day a year when they get them out. This is Moor Crag. Remember I mentioned earlier, and that's the great rock that's left. But the drive up to that house was huge. They blew a lot of rock out to make the driveway through. So it's sort of half and half arts and crafts. That's looking at the back of the house. I mentioned that there's twin gables of the horizontal roof between. Again, that's a shape that's been much imitated. Let's move on. Now, we're the Orchard, Chorleywood, Voysey's own house. There, him standing on the front doorstep. This was what appeared in a very early edition of Country Life, the bit on the right. Let's move on. Next. These pictures were given to me when I knocked on the door in 1976 or thereabouts by the architect who lived there at the time. Now, Voysey's, he put his hospital experience, his Saxon Snell, to use. Can you hear me all right? Yes? All right? In designing this exquisite cottage hospital. Cottage hospitals all the rage from the sort of 1870s. The first one was in Cranley, but from the 1870s, 80s, right through to almost the inception of the health service. And this is a particularly beautiful example in Beworthy in the middle of Devon. And it's been beautifully restored by the Landmark Trust, of which we have a very senior officer present with us this evening. And it's recently won a very prestigious Heritage Prize, hasn't it, Alistair? Thanks down to Alistair, I think. And it's also where the Voysey Society started, because the Voysey Society grew out of a campaign group to save the hospital, which I think was going to be demolished, probably. This is the back view of it. The children's ward was on the right, and the children's ward was placed on the side facing the railway, so the children would be entertained by watching the trains going past. Because they used to stay in hospital rather longer then than they are able to now. Lovely corridor, beautifully lit by one of his lovely long windows. Next slide, please. The floor, can you see there that the floor is rounded up to meet the wall? Voysey hated dust traps. And I trained at King's College Hospital. If you go and look in King's College Hospital, the original part, the floors and the walls are all rounded there. It's just the same period. A mosaic floor, beautifully done. Here's one of the later, this was the standard form of ventilator he used, and one of his standard fireplaces there. It's the same one figured twice. This is another of his prodigy houses this one is in Rutland, North Luffinham. And it's, sorry, this is called The Pastures, and this is a lovely, it was built for a lady who liked horses. And it's a beautiful entrance courtyard. There's the entrance door. If we move on a few, there are lovely views of it. It's often photographed in Pevsner's book on Pioneers of the Modern Movement had a picture of it. That facade, that lovely curved loggia there. But also it shows the limitations of even Voysey, of his constructional expertise. Very early on, Voysey, one of his earliest houses, in fact the cottage I showed you earlier, was designed for Michael Lakin, who was I think owns the cement company that later became Blue Circle. And because of that, he probably got a special deal for Voysey. Voysey used cement for his rough cast rather than lime mortar. And therefore damp gets behind it. I can see lots of nods from your heads. And it comes off, and you see what's happened. You've got a fairly ordinary brick underneath. Because one of the reasons for the rough cast is it produces a unified look to the house. With the buttresses, it accentuates this effect of it growing out of the earth. Let's move on. He built a factory for Sandersons, who Essex sold the firm to Sandersons in, I think, 1907. This factory is now offices. This is another of his great houses, Vodin, which is in Surrey. There are many. There's this wonderful golden triangle in Surrey with a lot of wonderful arts and crafts houses. That's the front door. A bit of sculpture in its own right. And a lot of these lovely, simple loggias at the back. This is just down the road from here. This is the White Lodge on the edge of Wandsworth Common. Not quite such a streamlined design, but he built it for, I think he was a builder actually. But when I knocked on the door, as I used to do in the 70s, the daughter of the commissioner, the chap who built the house, was still living it. And they had some Voysey furniture, which you can't really see there. And another characteristic staircase with lots of horizontals with the newels rising up. Next, please. This is an institute. Now, remember Broadley's Currer Briggs, the coalman, not the coalman in that sense, of course. He actually was a very enlightened employer, and he wanted to build a decent village. It was a sort of garden village, really, for his workers, with an institute and a pub, and this is it. Next one, please. This is some of the cottages there, which are rather better than the cottages you would have seen if the light had been better earlier on. This is inside the pub. Simplified. His oak work is getting simpler now. And this is, you know, we can see the trend towards greater simplicity. This is a house called Hollybank in near Beaconsfield, 1904, I think it is. Again, a very simple design. Let's move on. That's the inside with a Voysey piano on the right there. You can see it in the original picture just there on the left. Next, there we are. That's the back of it and the staircase. Let's move on. This is an inn in Stowmarket near Stetchworth, near Newmarket. A beautiful building which we went to quite recently on a tour. And let's move on. We'll move on. There are several of this. The stable yard at the back. Characteristic Voysey hinges there. And a store for the horses, all named there, you see. The people living there, I think it was on the market shortly after we went. Let's move on. And another house from his mature period, again, relatively simple. The homestead at Frinton. Up and coming place in 1906 or so when this house was built. And it's amazing looking at the original photographs how empty it all looks. Now it's completely built up. A bit like the Red House, Morris's house in Bexley Heath. You know, it's down just in a suburban street, whereas in the middle of the field originally. See, again, more simple motifs. Tiled arch over the entrance porch there. One of his characteristic window fixing. You have a great long stretch of stay. So you could actually, by having different positions, you could have the window open perpendicular to the wall if you wanted it. Much greater range of adjustment, but more expensive to do and more fiddly. That's the back of it. Let's whip through these. You've got a few, this is all relatively late houses. Inside, open plan, living hall there. You can just look down the corridor to the rest of the house. There's one of his window stays. Let's go on. That's inside. That fireplace has now been restored, I think. Good lit kitchen there, and a heart-shaped little stay for the window blind. Much simpler staircase now. None of those balusters. This is built for a very distinguished pioneer paediatrician, and I think he probably Voysey had a great respect for doctors, and I suspect he probably he wouldn't have stood up to James Goodhart as he became. If Goodhart, he obviously had strong views. Let's move on. Characteristic round window. On we go. Oh, this is the back of the house. Goodhart. This is an addition to an older house, and we've missed it. Can we go back one just to see? Voysey wanted him to demolish the original house, but he refused. So he's interlaced the roof. Can you see that? In an extraordinary way, where the two houses join. Hoping he would change his mind, but he didn't. Those are the stables. We're still in the stable area, you see. They changed to motor houses around this time. Now, this is a building that Voysey gutted completely for Emsley Horniman, who we met earlier on, if you remember. The one whose wife was locked in her bedroom. This is completely gutted, and he redid the interior. And it really is a tour de force. And this is the last commission he did for Horniman, which is, Horniman, again, very enlightened socially. He commissioned Voysey to build a playground in Kensal Green, which is a very poor part of London. It still is, I think, very deprived. Recently restored too. And then we're going on just to, I think, what was it? There you are. Arthur Simpson was a great friend of Voysey, a furniture craftsman. This is the house he built for him in Kendal, which is in 1909. I think it's one of his last. And that's the inside. Again, quite simple oak work.